Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 29th of January. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Funerals were held today for both the officer and the soldier killed in the Hezbollah attack in the north yesterday. Major Yochai Kalangel of Har Gilo was buried in the Mount Herzl Military Cemetery in the capital at a funeral attended by thousands. The 25-year-old was a company commander in the Givati Brigade. He grew up in the Gush Etzion community of Elazar and leaves behind his pregnant wife Tali and a one-year-old daughter. Kalangel was awarded a General Staff Commendation for Excellence this past Independence Day and fought during the summer conflict with Gaza. One of his 5 siblings described him as a giant of a man, a great warrior, and the salt of the earth. The other fallen soldier was Staff Sergeant Dor Chaim Nini, who was laid to rest at the Shtulim Moshav near Ashdod, where he resided. The 20-year-old Givati Brigade combat soldier also participated in Operation Protective Edge. His older brother, Aviel Nini, said that Dor was never afraid of anything and always smiling, and a hero who loved the army. The 7 soldiers wounded in yesterday's attack are still recuperating at medical facilities. It appears that the most recent round of violence between Israel and Hezbollah is over for now. An IDF investigation has been launched into why the military convoy that the casualties of yesterday's attack were traveling in was unarmored and so close to the northern border. We get more on the latest events from IBA's Margot Dudkevich.
A day after some 6 missiles hit an Israeli military convoy travelling near the border, killing Major Yochai Kalangel, Staff Sergeant Dor Chaim Nini, and injuring 7 soldiers, a military investigation into the fatal attack continues. Along the border with Lebanon today, the army remained on high alert. At the site of yesterday's attack, concrete barriers were erected along the road. Elsewhere in the north, it was business as usual. One of the key issues being examined by the army is why officers and soldiers patrolled the road near the Shaba farms at a time Hezbollah threatened retaliation for last week's attack in which Hezbollah operatives and an Iranian general were killed in the Syrian Golan Heights. The probe will also seek to determine who gave the orders for the soldiers and officers to go out on patrol in unarmoured vehicles, despite orders issued by the Northern Command to restrict movement near the border. Initial findings into yesterday's deadly attack reveals a convoy of 5 military jeeps and 3 unarmoured pickup trucks travelled on Road 99 from Mount Hermon to Kiryat Shmona. The aim was to familiarise the soldiers with the local area. The convoy turned at an intersection and headed in the direction of Rajal. 2 kilometres from the Lebanese border, the convoy passed a roadblock and headed towards Mount Dov. At this point, they received instructions to turn back. On the way back, the convoy stopped at a checkpoint but was delayed by a civilian car and shortly after was hit by 6 anti-tank rockets. Last night, the burned-out shell of the vehicle in which 2 soldiers were killed was removed from the scene. Hezbollah supporters in Beirut's Dahya neighborhood celebrated. Following the attack, Hezbollah relayed a message to Israel via the UN that the organization was not interested in further escalation. This was later confirmed by Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon, who said until the area calms down completely, the army will remain prepared and ready. Hezbollah, said Ya'alon, claims yesterday's attack was revenge, but the reason for last week's attack was because Hezbollah was preparing to set up a terror front on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. This shows they were preparing to increase tensions, possibly leading to war, Ya'alon said.
In my point of view, Israel must retaliate to keep our deterrence all over the Lebanese border. There is no interest from the Israeli side and the Lebanese side to escalate the situation ahead in the 3rd Lebanese war, but there is no question that in those circumstances Israel must retaliate and respond and send a clear message that if they will attack the IDF patrols or any Israeli targets along the border, Israel is going to respond.
This morning, the army resumed drilling operations to search for tunnels near Moshav Zarit, close to the Lebanese border. Moshav residents have complained to the army that for some time now they've been hearing drilling noises underground and fear that Hezbollah may be preparing attack tunnels to infiltrate into Israel. While Jerusalem weighs its options on whether to respond to this current round of tit-for-tat fighting, all eyes are glued on the north, where a tense calm prevails. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
Following security consultations, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to punish those responsible for yesterday's deadly attack on Mount Dov, and that whoever is behind it will pay the full price. He accused Iran of trying to establish an additional terrorist front against Israel from the Golan Heights through its proxy Hezbollah for some time, and said that the Lebanese government and the Assad regime in Syria share responsibility for the consequences of their actions. The Prime Minister's spokesman explains.
Iran, through its terrorist proxy Hezbollah, is directly responsible for today's attack on our northern border. The Iranians and their terrorist allies are working to build a new terrorist base in southern Syria, just like the one they have in Lebanon. This is the same Iran that propagates terror in the region and around the world, that is trying to become a nuclear threshold power. Now, Israel will do what we need to do to defend our borders and to protect our people.
Spain's ambassador to the United Nations is blaming Israel for the death of the UNIFIL peacekeeper from his nation during yesterday's exchange of fire with Hezbollah. According to Spanish Ambassador Roman Marchesi, the death of the 36-year-old peacekeeper resulted from the escalation of violence that had been initiated by Israel. The Security Council has condemned the death in the strongest terms, and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is calling for maximum calm and restraint and for all sides to act responsibly to prevent further friction in an already tense regional environment.
The members of the Security Council condemned in the strongest terms the death of a UNIFIL Spanish peacekeeper which occurred in the context of fire exchange along the Blue Line. The members of the Security Council expressed their deepest sympathy to the family of the fallen peacekeeper and to the government of Spain. Thank you very much.
Officials in the United States offered words of support for Israel while condemning the flare-up of violence on the northern border.
We support Israel's legitimate right to self-defense and continue to urge all parties to respect the blue line between Israel and Lebanon as prescribed by UNSCR 1701. We also, of course, condemn the act of violence and will be watching the situation closely.
Hezbollah has won this latest round with Israel. This according to Dr. Jonathan Spire of the Gloria Center, speaking with IBA's Aryeh O'Sullivan.
My sense is that the reason why it has concluded, as of now, as it appears, is because the government of Israel has decided at this stage not to escalate further. I must tell you that my own estimation of that, for what it's worth, is that Hezbollah can be considered to have won this round, because as of now, Hezbollah and its Iranian masters can conclude that they are at liberty to continue building their infrastructure for attacks on Israel east of the Quneitra crossing on the assumption that a certain price will be paid, a number of men may die, they'll then hit back, and Israel will then be quiet. That, I would think, is a price they are probably willing to pay. And as it stands, that is the price which Israel is apparently seeking to charge them.
Turning now to election news, and that big-name soccer legend drafted into Habayit UD dropped out just ahead of tonight's deadline for parties to register to run. Here with all the details is IBA's political correspondent, Ellie Wogelenter.
With tonight's 10 o'clock deadline looming, Habayit UD had to readjust its Knesset list today when a late addition to the party became a major distraction, forcing his retraction. Eli Ohana notified Naftali Bennett that he will not take the 8th slot on Habayit UD list, saying he is not ready for political life at the moment. But it also might be because of intense inter-party backlash over the last 72 hours, including affiliated rabbis threatening to abandon the party, following Bennett's move to add the former soccer star to a top spot on the party's list. MK Zvulun Kalfa of the Tkuma party, which is running with Habayit UD, quit the party after the announcement that Ohana would receive the 8th slot, but Kalfa changed his mind this morning following the news that Ohana had quit and asked to be reinstated. No final word on that. At the same time, former Yesha Council Chairman Danny Dayan, who ran in the Habayit UD primary, has quit the party, which issued a statement saying Dayan gave notice that he would be turning to another party after he refused to accept the number 17 slot. Now to Likud, and here's a surprising name back in politics. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced this afternoon that Benny Begin is back with the party. Netanyahu placed the son of former Prime Minister Menachem Begin 11th on the Knesset list, a reserve slot at the discretion of the party leader. The addition of Begin means that the other reserved candidate named by Netanyahu, Dr. Anat Berko, has now been named to the 23rd slot. Berko is a world-renowned terrorism expert who teaches at the Herzliya Interdisciplinary Center's Lauder School of Government. Both appointments needed the okay of the Likud Secretariat, which gave its approval today. And they have to, because the deadline for submitting lists is less than 6 hours away. The process began yesterday when 8 parties registered to give in their lists and request the letters that are used on voting slips. We now have an official name in English for the merger of Likud and Hatzanuah. It's the Zionist Union, and not the literal translation of its name in Hebrew, Hamachaneh Tzioni, or Zionist Camp. Some of the parties registering included the Pirate Party, the Greenleaf Party, Ubezchutan, Haredi Women for Change, and the Breslov Party, called We Are All Friends Nanach. None of those parties is expected to cross the threshold. MKs from Yisrael Beitenu and Likud wrote petitions to the Central Election Committee today saying MK Hanin Zoabi from Balad supports terrorism and should not be allowed in the next Knesset. According to Yisrael Beitenu, the petition has support from Likud, Bayit Yehudi, and Shas. The Central Election Committee banned Balad from running from the last Knesset following petitions from Likud and Yisrael Beitenu, but the Supreme Court overturned the decision. And the on-again, off-again merger between Eli Yishai's Yachad, Ha'amitanu, and Osma Yehudit. Right now, it looks like it's not going to happen, but we'll know later. We now wait until 10 o'clock tonight, and then the campaign will start for real. Erin?
Thanks for that report. In other news, an official state memorial service for late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was held today at his gravesite on the Hebrew anniversary of his death last year. Israel's 11th Prime Minister served in the post from March of 2001 until he suffered a series of strokes and went into a coma on April 14th of 2006. Sharon remained in a long-term care facility until the time of his death at the age of 85. During his address to those gathered at Sharon's Sycamore Ranch in the Negev today, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Sharon very well understood the nature of the regime in Iran in a view that is still valid today, and Netanyahu pressed home his insistence that Iran is behind yesterday's Hezbollah attack. In the midst of the controversy over Prime Minister Netanyahu's upcoming speech to a joint session of Congress, U.S. President Barack Obama told CNN why he thinks that there is no rebuttal to his stance on the Iranian nuclear negotiations.
I speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu all the time. We're declining to meet with him. I'm declining to meet with him simply because our general policy is we don't meet with any world leader 2 weeks before their election. I think that's inappropriate, and that's true with some of our closest allies. David Cameron, who's got an election coming up, recently came to visit because we insisted that if he wants to come, and it was a very important meeting, he needs to be far away enough from the election that it doesn't look like in some ways we're meddling or putting our thumbs on the scale. To the broader issue, Fareed, I don't think there's been any rebuttal of my argument. I haven't heard a persuasive rebuttal of my argument that we crafted very effective sanctions against Iran specifically to bring them to the negotiations table to see if we could resolve the Iranian nuclear issue through diplomatic means. By all accounts, including the accounts of Israeli intelligence, Iran has abided by the terms of this interim agreement. They have not advanced their nuclear program. They have actually rolled back their stockpiles of highly enriched uranium. And so we have lost nothing during this period of negotiations. Iran's program has not advanced. And we have the chance of providing a mechanism where we can verify that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon and Iran has the ability over time to re-enter the community of nations as a responsible player. Now, I don't know that we're going to be able to get that done, but my argument is for the United States Congress to insist on imposing new sanctions that all our partners, as well as the Iranians, can interpret as a violation of the interim agreement. For us to undermine diplomacy at this critical time for no good reason is a mistake. And that what we need to do is to finish up this round of negotiations, put the pressure on Iran to say yes to what the international community is calling for. And what's been remarkable is the unity we've been able to maintain in the P5+1, even with Russia, given all the strains that we have with them. China, which obviously has a great hunger for Iranian oil, we've still been able to maintain that unity, which shows how effective our diplomats have been. And if, in fact, we don't get a deal, make sure that it's the Iranians' fault because they couldn't say yes to a reasonable deal. And so I haven't heard a good counter-argument yet. I will veto legislation if it comes up that imposes additional sanctions. And, by the way, what I've said to members of Congress and what I've said to the Israelis is the day after Iran walks away from a reasonable deal, the easiest thing for me to do in Congress is pass additional sanctions against Iran. It would take about 2 days for me to be able to sign a bill like that. So we have the ability to exert additional pressure, but it's important for us to show that we've exhausted every possible avenue of diplomatic resolution.
International Holocaust Memorial Day was commemorated at the United Nations following a 24-hour storm delay. The 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz was a major theme of this year's ceremony, as Alexander Jen has the story.
Members of the United Nations, along with Holocaust survivors and Red Army vets, gathered at the Assembly Hall of the UN to remember the Holocaust. The UN used the ceremony to address the issue of genocide worldwide, titling the event, "Why Have We Failed in Preventing Genocide, and How Can We Change That?" Featured speaker President Reuven Rivlin defined the nature of evil, saying, "It seeks to differentiate and discriminate between one life and another, between one human and another, where the only real difference is between good and bad, between humanity and darkness." The theme of the event was liberty, life, and the legacy of the Holocaust survivors, and began with a moment of silence. The ceremony comes at a difficult time for Jews in present day, due to the recent spike in anti-Semitism throughout Europe. Israeli Ambassador Ron Prosh-Or used the French attack at the kosher supermarket as an example. He called these kinds of acts the same indifference for Jewish life that existed 70 years ago. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is also concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism.
Yet even today, after all we have witnessed, all that we know, and all we have pledged, and all we have done, we face widespread challenges to our common humanity. Anti-Semitism remains a violent reality. Jews continue to be killed solely because they are Jews.
The function was held a day after International Holocaust Remembrance Day due to blizzard-like weather in New York City. It was the 10th year the UN has commemorated the Holocaust victims. The overriding message this year is that genocide is unacceptable and that everything in our power must be done to prevent it. World powers must unite against anti-Semitism to avoid another recurrence of the Holocaust. Alexandra Jen for IBA News.
Late Argentinian prosecutor Alberto Nisman will be buried today at La Tablata in Greater Buenos Aires metro area. He was born to a Jewish family in 1963 in the Argentinian capital and will be laid to rest in a Jewish cemetery. Nisman's former assistant, charged with illegally loaning him the gun that killed him, has spoken out now publicly for the first time. 38-year-old information specialist Diego Lago Marcino said that Nisman told him he did not trust his state-assigned protective detail and feared for the safety of his two daughters. Shockwaves over Nisman's death continue to rock the South American nation. After his ex-wife said that a second autopsy was not required, his body was released for a wake last night. Police had to hold back mourners gathered outside who were demanding justice and booed all government officials who came to pay their respects. The 51-year-old died of a gunshot to the head just before he was set to testify before Congress that President Cristina Fernandez was implicated in his case against Iran's involvement in the 1985 bombing of the Jewish Community Center that killed 85 people. Deputy Police Commissioner Nissim Moore underwent questioning again today over allegations of sexual misconduct against a female subordinate. This follows his dismissal from the force by Inspector General Yochanan Danino last night. According to a statement from the department, Danino refused to accept Moore's attempt to resign and fired him instead. The 36-year-old veteran policeman is the seventh high-ranking officer to either quit or be dismissed over allegations of criminal misconduct in less than a year and a half. Moore also faces charges of obstruction of justice for allegedly destroying evidence in the case against him. In local finance, the shekel today gained strength against all major foreign currencies, while share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were down on this last day of the trading week. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. The IBA weather team tells us that tomorrow we can expect a return to more winter-like conditions with a drop in temperatures, hazy conditions in the south, and isolated rainfall in the north, and the possibility of light flurries of snow on Mount Hermon. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I'll be back tomorrow to bring you the latest breaking news. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.